Her words hit like a physical blow, a chilling pronouncement in the warm, festive air of the restaurant. "We wish you were never born." My mother's voice was low, but each syllable was a shard of ice. My father, standing beside her, simply nodded, his face a mask of cold disappointment. The cheerful clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation around us seemed to fade into a distant roar. For a moment, the world tilted, the floor dropping away beneath my feet. A fire ignited in my chest, a white-hot pain that threatened to consume me, but I refused to let it show. I straightened my spine, meeting their gazes without flinching. "If that is what you wish," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a calm island in the tempest of my emotions. "Then consider me as if I never existed." I turned and walked away. I walked slowly, deliberately, each footstep on the polished hardwood floor echoing like a final, percussive gunshot against the sudden, heavy silence that had fallen over our table. The short journey from the dining room to the heavy brass doors of the restaurant felt like a mile. Once outside, the cool Boston air did little to quell the inferno inside me. 30 minutes later, as my taxi navigated the glittering streets, my pocket began to vibrate uncontrollably. I pulled out my phone. The screen was a frantic strobe of light. 52 missed calls, from the very people who had just wished me gone. My name is Peter Harrison, and this is the story of how I was broken, erased, and then reborn from the ashes. It was the morning of my graduation. I woke before the sun, the familiar skyline of Boston framed by the large window of my small Seaport District apartment. The harbor was a sheet of dark slate, just beginning to catch the first blush of dawn. Steel and glass towers stood as silent sentinels, their windows reflecting the nascent light. Today was supposed to be my day. It was the culmination of years of relentless exhaustion, of sleepless nights hunched over textbooks and financial models, of countless personal sacrifices that I had made willingly, believing they would one day be recognized. I swung my legs out of bed and told myself not to think about the money, not to dwell on the endless stream of bills I paid that weren't mine, not to let anything tarnish the pride of my MBA graduation day. My phone buzzed on the nightstand before my feet even hit the cool wood floor. A text from my mother. "Remember, Peter, let Jess sit in the middle at the head table tonight. Your guests can take the side tables near the back." A minute later, a follow-up from my dad chimed in. "And don't brag about that multimillion-dollar merger you closed. It sounds arrogant." I stood there, staring at the screen as steam from the shower began to fill the bathroom, my chest tightening into a familiar knot. Even on the day of my biggest achievement, the spotlight belonged to someone else. My accomplishments were not a source of pride, but a potential source of embarrassment. When I walked into the kitchen, my best friend, Mike Chun, was already there, leaning against the counter with 2 steaming coffees. He wore the same easy grin he had back when we were high school lab partners. "This is your day, man. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, steal it from you." He handed me a cup. The warmth seeped into my hands, a small comfort. I forced a smile, but my stomach twisted into a tighter knot. On campus, the late spring air was filled with a palpable sense of triumph. Brightly colored balloons swayed in the gentle breeze coming off the Charles River. Professors in their dark, flowing robes shook hands with proud parents. Families cheered as names were called, their shouts echoing across the manicured lawn. When my name was announced, a genuine cheer went up from a small section, Mike, and my work colleague, Sarah. As I crossed the stage, Professor Albright, the dean of the business school, gave me a firm hug, his voice a low whisper in my ear. "You are one of the sharpest minds I've ever had the privilege to teach, Peter. Don't you ever forget that." At the reception that followed, Sarah Miller clapped me on the back, her voice carrying easily above the joyful din. "You saved that merger when no one else could see a path forward. Tonight, we drink to Peter Harrison, the man who pulls rabbits out of hats." Their pride in me felt real, a tangible thing I could almost hold. It was a stark contrast to the hollow space I felt when I thought of my own family. I checked my phone, and a new notification buzzed. It was an email from the restaurant. The deposit for the evening's dinner had been adjusted. 3 additional tables added per family request. I hadn't approved that. My credit card had been charged for it anyway. By late afternoon, I found myself standing on the bridge overlooking the Charles River, the water flashing a deep emerald green under the sun. I opened my worn leather journal and wrote just one desperate line. I don't want to be used anymore. I want to be seen. I snapped the cover shut as my phone vibrated once more. This time it was a text from my sister, Jessica. We need to talk tonight. It's important. Back in my apartment, I showered and dressed for the dinner. The restaurant had sent over the final seating chart. My friends, my colleagues, the very people who had carried me through the grueling 2 years of the MBA program, were pushed to the far edge of the room, seated at tables right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. My parents' side of the family, aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to, occupied the prime real estate in the center of the room. Jessica's name was written in a bold, elegant script, positioned directly at the main table, the seat of honor. My own name looked like a hastily scribbled afterthought at a corner table. For a fleeting, powerful moment, I considered canceling everything. Just calling the restaurant, eating the cost of the deposit, and spending the night with the people who actually saw me. But then a colder, more calculated thought took hold. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. If they were going to try to humiliate me, if they were going to erase me one more time in front of everyone I respected, I would have proof. I pressed the red record button and slid the phone into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. As evening fell, the city lit up. Amber headlights crawled across Commonwealth Avenue in a mesmerizing, endless procession. I buttoned my suit jacket, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and told myself, tonight, they will see me. Still, Jessica's message blinked on my screen like a persistent, anxious pulse I couldn't ignore. I kept a record of everything I had done for them. The walk across the Boston College campus earlier that day had stirred up memories I tried my best to keep buried, ghosts of the moments I first realized I was invisible in my own home. We lived in Wellesley, Massachusetts, a quiet, affluent suburb where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the houses all looked comfortably alike. But inside our house, the rules were never the same for the 2 children. At 16, I had just won the Massachusetts State Math Championship. It was a grueling competition, hours of intense focus culminating in a victory that felt like pure magic. I came home with the heavy gold medal still warm against my chest, my heart soaring. My dad barely looked at it before turning to chat with our neighbor, as if my win meant nothing. Jessica's already writing her pre-med essays, he'd said, a proud smile spreading across his face. She's going to be a doctor, the pride of this family. The solid gold medal in my hand might as well have been a piece of plastic. Then there was my birthday party. My friends from school were crowded into our small living room. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling, and a large sheet cake sat on the dining table. I leaned in, ready to blow out the candles, when I noticed the bright red icing scrawled across the top. Happy birthday, Jessica. My own name was squeezed into a tiny corner in small, apologetic letters. My friends laughed, assuming it was some kind of inside joke. I laughed too, a hollow, brittle sound, even as I felt something vital inside my chest crack. It was Mike, back then just another awkward kid in the math club, who leaned toward me during the party and whispered, "You don't need their permission to shine, man." I didn't know then how much I would cling to those words in the years to come. One summer afternoon, while helping my dad clear out old boxes in the garage, I stumbled upon a thick file labeled College Fund Kids. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped it open. Inside, every line item, every withdrawal slip, every check was marked for Jessica. SAT prep courses, advanced biology lab fees, expensive application consultants. The balance was nearly drained. My name wasn't on a single page. When my mom saw me holding the folder, her face tightened. She snatched it from my hands. "You're the older one," she said briskly, avoiding my eyes. "You'll go into finance. You'll make money quickly. Your sister needs this more." The words cut deep, lodging themselves in my memory like splinters I could never quite dig out. I tucked the math medal into a shoebox under my bed, beside old notebooks and worn-down pencils. It stayed there, gathering dust, while Jessica's biology awards and academic decathlon trophies lined the living room mantel. At family dinners, every story, every anecdote, circled back to her achievements. I slowly became the background character in my own house, a supporting role in the Jessica Harrison story. Years later, I would understand the full truth. The college fund, established by my grandparents, was meant to be for both of us. It had been systematically drained long before I even started applying to schools. That was why I had to work 2 jobs all through college. It was why I filled out scholarship applications in the dead of night, fueled by cheap coffee. It was why I learned to survive on instant ramen while Jessica's tuition was covered without a single question. I chose to major in economics because it was practical, a fast track to financial independence. Graduate early, get a job, get my own place, stop being a burden. That was the plan. At Boston College, I learned to live small. A mattress on the floor of a tiny off-campus apartment. A desk I'd found on a curbside. A calendar on the wall covered in a dizzying mosaic of work shifts. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I opened the campus coffee shop at 5 a.m. The pre-dawn air thick with the smell of roasted beans and bleach. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I keyed in case numbers at a downtown law office until midnight, my fingers numb under the relentless fluorescent hum. Every month, I sent money home to help with the mortgage and utilities. At first, it felt good, like tangible proof that I was useful, that I was contributing. Then it became expected. Then it became required. Then it became invisible. When my first real paycheck from my internship landed, I took the tea to a department store and bought my mom a soft, cashmere scarf I'd seen her admire in a catalog. I wrapped it myself and wrote a note about how one day I'd be able to do even more for them. That night, Dad texted me. This month, Jess needs a new anatomy set for her lab. Can you transfer a bit extra? No mention of the scarf. No mention of me. I made the transfer, standing at a bus stop in the biting November cold, watching my breath plume in the air and disappear. The requests came in waves, always urgent, always last minute. They won't release her lab slot unless we pay the fee today. There was a surprise fee for her clinical hours. The utility bill posted late and we're short. I learned how to move money between accounts like sand through a fist. Every time I told myself this is the last emergency. And every time another one would arrive right on schedule. One night, sitting in my quiet room, the old floor heater ticking rhythmically, I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. I typed a title I didn't want to see. Family Ledger. XLSX. I started listing every transfer, every bill I'd covered, every time I'd bailed them out of a financial deadline that someone else had missed. The numbers lined up like silent proof of a truth no one wanted to admit. I kept the file synced to my phone, a secret bookkeeping of a love no one else wanted to balance. The summer before my senior year, the calls turned into alarms. The first tuition loan for Jessica's upcoming term had hit a snag, just hours before the cutoff. My mom's voice shook on the line. They just need a guarantor for a few weeks, Peter, until your dad's paperwork clears. It's nothing, just a formality. I signed the guarantee from a library computer, my heart hammering against my ribs, telling myself it was temporary. A few months later, a representative from the bank called to confirm the extension of the guarantee on a newly restructured and much larger loan. My name was featured in bold. I stared at the ceiling after the call, the fan blades blurring into a circle. We had agreed it would be temporary. They had promised it would be removed. That evening, Jessica texted, "I thought they took your name off. I'm so sorry." I believed her. I didn't want a villain in this story. I just wanted a family that kept its word. By the time I applied to the MBA program, I was fluent in the language of crisis. I negotiated multi-million-dollar vendor contracts by day and negotiated with my own blood by night. When I got my acceptance letter, I paid the hefty deposit with a laugh that sounded more like a cough. I told myself this degree would finally change the math, that it would shift the balance of power. Now, on the night of my graduation, standing in a restaurant they hadn't paid for, at a party I was hosting, the familiar math was asserting itself once again. They were pushing me to the edges, and I finally understood that I was about to run out of edges to be pushed to. The dinner was where everything finally broke apart. The Back Bay restaurant looked like the life I thought I was finally earning. Warm light, low jazz, and crystal stemware caught the room's collective breath. Mike walked beside me, bumping my shoulder on purpose, a familiar gesture he used whenever he sensed I was drifting away into my own thoughts. Professor Albright arrived in a sharp navy dress and hugged me with both arms. Sarah waved from the bar, her grin bright enough to clear a path through the crowd. For a brief, shimmering second, the evening felt clean, uncluttered, mine. Then my parents appeared, wearing the practiced smiles of hosts who know the script by heart. They hugged me softly, a brief, almost performative gesture, before pivoting hard and sweeping Jessica forward like a prized centerpiece. "This is our Jessica," my mom said to Professor Albright. "She saves lives." My dad shook Sarah's hand and asked her what it was like to work with someone who sits at a desk all day. I swallowed the metallic taste of bitterness that rose in my throat. I glanced at the floor diagram the maitre d' had placed on an easel near the entrance. The central table glowed under a halo of pendant lights. Jessica's nameplate sat in the middle, right beside my mother's, surrounded by a half-moon of relatives. My own name was printed on a card at a corner table near the swinging kitchen door, the one that breathed out steam and the clatter of dishes each time it opened. My friends, the people who had fought for me and with me, were assigned there, too. When we took our seats, a senior partner from my firm, who I admired greatly, asked my parents if they were proud of me. My mother's smile was thin. "He's always been good with numbers," she said, as if describing a calculator instead of her son. "But Jessica, well, she saves people." Sarah, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, lifted her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, her voice clear and strong. She spoke about the merger I had rescued that spring, how it had kept a historic Boston company from collapsing, how it had saved the jobs of nearly 1,000 families. Before she could finish, my dad cut in, his tone politely dismissive. "That is his job," he said. "It's not the same as what Jessica does." The table seemed to absorb the judgment like a sponge. I kept breathing, focusing on the candle flame flickering in front of me. I told myself to remember the river, the journal, the promise I had made to myself just hours earlier. Under the table, Mike pressed his hand on my shoulder. "Not your fault," he whispered. Behind us, an aunt I barely knew murmured to her husband, just loud enough for me to hear, "Peter has money, but no soul." I didn't turn around. I fixed my eyes on the candle and watched the flame tremble and then straighten. On my way back from the restroom, I passed Jessica. She was turned slightly away from the room, speaking in a hushed, hoarse voice to a friend from her residency program. "If Peter hadn't paid for everything," she said, "I would have crashed and burned a long time ago, but they'll never say that out loud." The truth, stark and unadorned, sat in the air between us like a third person. She saw me, flinched, and looked down at her shoes. I gave her a small, tight nod and kept walking. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I knew the pressure she was under. I wanted to tell her that understanding didn't make the weight any lighter. Back at the table, my phone buzzed. A colleague had tagged me in an Instagram story. The caption read, "Tonight's star, Dr. Jessica. So proud of Jess." The camera panned across the smiling faces of relatives I knew from childhood, and then cut away just before it reached my corner of the room. I was literally edited out of my own celebration. I watched it twice. The second time hurt more. An email banner dropped down along the top of my screen from the restaurant. Updated invoice. I opened it without thinking. The new, much larger total stared back at me. My card on file. My name on the line that mattered most. I scrolled down to the notes section at the bottom. A new line had been added by the manager. "Thank you for hosting this wonderful celebration. Congratulations to Dr. Jessica." My parents' laughter floated across the room as they told a cousin that they had put this entire evening together for our Jessica, who makes us all so proud. I felt something inside me click firmly into place. It wasn't a violent snap, but the steady, irreversible engagement of a lock. I picked up my water glass and clinked it softly with my spoon. The room did not quiet at first. I did it again a bit louder. The voices began to fall away like coins into a well. Sarah looked at me with concern. Professor Albright folded her hands expectantly. Mike watched my face with the intense focus of a friend standing vigil on a cliff's edge. I stood up, my shoulders squared, the remaining murmur thinning into a complete hush. I could feel the jazz music fading behind me, the candlelight pooling at the base of my glass, the kitchen door swinging open and shut in a rhythm I had known my whole life. I filled my lungs, held the room in the space of a single breath, and prepared to stop pretending I wasn't there. My voice shook on the first few syllables before it found bone. If I'm just the family wallet, I began, my words cutting through the stillness. Then who paid for all of this? I gestured around the elegant room. Who paid the bills, the tuition, the hospital fees for the last 12 years? For a breath, no one moved. Even the jazz music stopped. Someone set a fork down, and the small clatter sounded as loud as a gavel. I kept going because I had carried this ledger in my head for over a decade. I paid the power bill when the lights were about to be shut off. I covered the late fees when the notices came in red envelopes. I guaranteed loans I was told would be temporary, loans that somehow never let me go. Every single month, I sent money home so someone else could breathe. A ripple of murmurs rustled through the tables. My dad's face colored to the shade of a warning light. "You ungrateful child," he said, his voice rising, thick with fury. "After everything we've done for you." Then my mother spoke, her voice low and venomous. "We wish you were never born." The sentence hit the room like a physical shockwave. I stared at the candle on my table, watched the flame bend in a draft from the kitchen, and then stand back up, tall and straight. I swallowed, tasted copper, and scanned the faces that had watched me grow from a quiet kid with a math medal into a man who paid for the cake and still didn't get a slice. "If that is what you wish," I said, my voice surprising me with its profound calm, "then consider me as if I never existed." Chairs creaked. Cousin's jaw dropped. Sarah's eyes went fierce with a kind of protective anger I had never felt on my behalf from my own blood. I set my glass down, its base clicking sharply against the crystal. And then I walked away. The hardwood floor gave my steps a definitive, rhythmic beat. I crossed the ring of light around the central table, walked past the stunned maitre d', and pushed through the heavy brass-handled doors into the hallway. "Peter," Mike called, catching up, but I lifted a hand without turning around. "Let me go alone." He slowed, and in that small pause, I felt the clean, sharp edge of something finally, irrevocably, ending. Outside, the Boston night hummed and blinked. A text flashed on my screen before the door swung shut behind me. It was Jessica. "I am so sorry. I know what you've done for all of us. I was just afraid to say it." I stood under the restaurant's awning as the valet whistled for a cab. I stared at her message until the screen blurred. I typed nothing back. In the taxi, the city slid by in wet, impressionistic strokes of red and white light smearing across the rain-slicked windshield. My phone buzzed in my pocket like a trapped insect. My mother, my father, my Aunt Carol, a colleague who didn't know what to do with the deafening silence I had left behind. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression questioning. I let it ring. I let all of it ring. When I reached my building, I climbed the stairs to avoid the possibility of elevator chatter. I unlocked my door and stepped into the darkness of my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and walked to the window, the city breathing its electric life below. The screen lit up again, insistent. When I finally picked it up, the number on the lock screen stared back at me. 52 missed calls. I counted them because counting is what I do when I need the world to make sense, to take a shape. 52 attempts to pull me back into the old, familiar role in the span of less than an hour. 52 times I had chosen to stay gone. An email pinged and slid into view. It was the receipt from the restaurant. "Thank you for your payment. Congratulations to Dr. Jessica." I let out a single humorless laugh that cracked at the end. Even the automated receipt had learned the family's script. I powered the phone down, and the apartment went completely quiet. I kicked off my shoes, walked to the window, and set my forehead against the cool glass. Tonight, I said out loud, to the street, to the water, to whatever part of me still needed permission, I'm free. That night, I closed the door on my family for good. Morning came like a knock I didn't want to answer. I turned my phone back on, not out of desire, but necessity. Work would need me. The messages flooded in as if a dam had cracked somewhere just before dawn. Dad, you embarrassed us in front of everyone. Mom, family comes first, Peter. Unless you decide you're above it. A cousin's commentary dressed up as concern. And then Jessica. Please don't hate me. The screen pulsed with a dizzying alternation of judgments and pleas. I put the phone face down on the counter and focused on the simple act of breathing. At the office, the world made sense again. Numbers lined up. Strategic plans had clear outputs. Sarah stepped into my doorway without knocking, leaning on the frame. You told the truth, she said, her voice soft but firm. I'm proud of you. The words landed gently where the others had bruised. Later, an email from Professor Albright found its way to me between meetings. Your voice is clear, Peter. Keep it that way. Felt like fresh water after days of salt. That evening, as the sky over the harbor turned the color of an old bruise, I was reheating leftover noodles when my apartment's intercom buzzed. I pressed the button, and my mother's voice, too composed to be casual, filled the small speaker. We're here. Let us up. The elevator ride seemed to take forever, and then not long enough. When the knock came, it was a quick, practiced rhythm I hadn't heard at my own door in years. My mom stood in front, flanked by my Aunt Carol, with my dad a step behind them, his jaw set like concrete. They didn't ask to come in. They assumed they would be welcomed. I met them in the doorway and did not move. We need to talk, my mom said, her voice clipped. Jessica's residency program has unexpected costs. It's your responsibility as her brother to help. The word responsibility hung in the air between us like a looped rope. My responsibility ended, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. When you told me I didn't deserve to exist, the air in the hallway thinned. Aunt Carol's eyes dropped to the carpet. My dad's gaze burned past me into the apartment, as if he could appraise the square footage and convert it into a moral debt I still owed. Suddenly, Jessica's name lit up my phone on the console table behind me. She was video calling. I answered it and held the screen up so they could see her face. It was pale and strained, her eyes red-rimmed against the sterile, fluorescent backdrop of a hospital corridor. I knew, she said, her voice cracking. I knew you were carrying it all, Peter. I should have said something. I was just so scared that if I stepped out of the spotlight, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Her confession didn't absolve anything. It only made the shape of the family machine clearer. My dad spoke over her image, his voice firm, tired of pretense. We needed someone to handle the finances. You were good at it. That's how families are supposed to work. Don't make this so dramatic. That sentence turned the key in a lock I had been rattling all my life. I put the phone down, letting Jessica's face hover on the table, and reached for a binder I had tucked onto the bookshelf by the door. I had printed the entire family ledger. XLSX file the week I was accepted into the MBA program. Maybe because a thing on paper feels harder to deny. I opened it to the first page and handed it to my mother. This is 12 years, I said. Rent when you were short. Medicine when the insurance fought you. Winter gas bills, late fees, 2 rounds of tuition loans I guaranteed and was told would be temporary. You don't have to thank me, but you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. They turned the pages in a heavy silence. The hallway hummed with the ambient noise of other people's lives, distant televisions and the clatter of dinners being prepared. Finally, my mother handed the binder back as if it were contaminated. That's what an eldest son does, she said, her voice crisp and chilly. It isn't a favor, it's duty. Anger rose in me, then passed like a fever breaking. No, I said softly. It was love, and you kept calling it duty so you wouldn't have to love me back. I stepped forward into the doorway, making the space smaller. Final. From now on, you will figure it out without me. I am not the family's wallet anymore. Aunt Carol's mouth trembled as if she wanted to speak, but she remained silent. My dad squared his shoulders, assuming the old posture of final authority. But there was nothing left for him to command. I hope you find a way, I said. I hope Jessica finds her own balance and her own voice. But I am done. I eased the door inward until the frame touched their shoes. Take care of yourselves. I closed the door. The latch caught with a small, decisive click. For a moment, I stood with my palm flat against the wood, feeling the faint vibrations from the hallway on the other side. Knuckles hit the door in a rapid, angry burst. The old litany of insults returned, muffled by the barrier. Selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. They were ghosts who hadn't realized there was no house left to haunt. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my back to the world I had just sealed off. Tears came, not with heat or anger, but with the quiet finality of an evacuation. The knocking thinned, then faded, their voices dissolving into the hum of the building. In the new quiet, I could hear the low and constant pulse of the city, a rhythm that didn't care about our broken family scripts. I stood, wiped my face on the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and looked around the little room that had held me through so many late nights and early mornings. The door behind me was just wood and paint and hinges, but it felt like a line I had finally drawn in wet concrete. On my side of it, there was air. On my side of it, there was room enough to live. Have you ever felt erased by the very people meant to protect you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true stories of heartbreak and resilience.